Bonjour tout le monde, mon nom est Greg Fergus. Je suis le député de Haute-Hermer et le secrétaire parlementaire à la présidente du Conseil du Trésor et aussi le secrétaire parlementaire du Premier ministre du Canada. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais reconnaître que je me trouve sur le territoire non cédé et traditionnel du peuple algonquin Anishinaabe. If we want to see a more equitable and inclusive Canada, we must recognize the lived experiences of all Canadians, starting with the people who have inhabited this land since time immemorial. This is why I'm proud to be here with you today, as we take this important step as government to recognize the role that soldiers of the No.2 Construction Battalion played in our history. These brave people saw themselves as proud Canadians who wanted to help their country, but they were met with hostility and racism and were treated unfairly. Although long overdue, this apology is a step toward a future where all Canadians can proudly contribute to our country and be celebrated. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and joining us for this event. Before we get started, I would like to ask everyone, please, to put their microphones on mute. That way, this will eliminate background noise, helps with simultaneous translation, and enhances the sound for all participants. Please note that simultaneous interpretation is available, and you can access English, French, or floor feeds as you prefer. I'm looking forward to hearing from all our speakers today who are representing the federal and provincial governments, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, as well as the larger Black community and the National Advisory Committee. So I'm very interested in hearing today's updates from our speakers. And before we do that, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Owen Lee, who will help kick things off with his beautiful renditions of O Canada and the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice. Owen?
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God, keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. We sing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on to victory is won.
Thank you, Owen. That was just a powerful performance, and what an uplifting song. I'd like to turn it over now to the Executive Director of the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, Mr. Russell Grosse, to talk about some of the work that they've been doing over at the BCCNS. Russell and his team have been committed to the preservation of Black history in Canada, and his work has led to this moment today. Russell, the mic is yours, brother.
Thank you. Greetings, Your Honors, Minister Anand, MP Fergus, special guests, and friends. It is my pleasure to welcome you here virtually and in person to the Black Cultural Centre. Today is a very historic occasion. The story of the No.2 Construction Battalion is a story of resilience, pride, honor, that was unfortunately marred with the effects of racial discrimination. Many years ago in this very space, the determination and curiosity of our dear departed friend, the late Senator Calvin Ruck, came to life with the chronicling of a little-known fact of Canadian history. Supported passionately by the late Captain George Borden, these two men made it their life's work to have the story of these brave men shared to a high level of awareness. I'm sure they'd be, if they were here with us today, they'd be very proud of the achievements that we've made and the moves that we've made to make this a remarkable part of Canadian history. And I'm proud to stand here today on their shoulders and continue that important work. Following the former Minister of Defence's intent to apologize that took place a year ago today, the Black Cultural Centre was tasked with working closely with government to gather meaningful consultation from Canadians on the important journey for the No.2 Construction Battalion. I'm grateful to share that over the past year, we developed a National Advisory Committee of 22 members that are made up of descendants, historians, and people that are passionate about the legacy of the No.2. I could not be more proud to work with this special group of people that are made up of individuals from coast to coast. Over the last year, we've engaged with hundreds of descendants and individuals interested in the legacy of these brave men through local and national awareness events, a series of interactive national consultations, and feedback. This feedback has been powerful, to say the least, and it has given us the privilege to learn a little bit more about the members of No.2. It allowed us to dig deeper into who those men were and their important contribution to Canadian society and Canadian history. All of this was done in partnership with the Canadian Armed Forces and is a true example of what positive partnership between community and government can be like. All levels of government have demonstrated their commitment to this process. For the Government of Canada, whether it be the Government of Canada, the Province of Nova Scotia, the town of Pictou, the town of Truro, they all proudly stand with us as a diverse community. I'm truly grateful to Minister Anand for her leadership, those members of the Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces teams that work with us on a daily basis, and members of our National Advisory Committee for their time, dedication, and moving towards an apology that is meaningful, sincere, and something that enforces the notion to the men of the No.2 Construction Battalion that we see them and we honor them. On behalf of the Black Cultural Society, Black Cultural Centre Board Chair Brenda Francis, who's here with us today, and members of the National Advisory Committee, we thank you for the trust and confidence you put into the Black Cultural Centre and being a part of this important part of Canadian history. Thank you.
Thank you for that update, Russell. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our Minister for National Defence, the Honourable Anita Anand, Member of Parliament for Oakville, to say a few words. Anita?
Thank you, Greg. Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to join you today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Thank you all for being here today from right across Canada and beyond. We are here to commemorate and to pay tribute to the members of the No.2 Construction Battalion, to hear their incredible stories and to learn from their descendants. Every one of these heroes deserved appreciation and recognition, but they were often ignored before, during, and long after their service. Today is an important step in our efforts to address this historical wrong and to ensure that we learn from the past in order to build a more equitable and just future for the members of our Canadian Armed Forces. There remains much work to do to change the culture of our defense team and to make sure that we have an institution that looks like the population it serves, where all members feel safe, protected, and respected. Every day, I will continue to work with General Eyre and with all Canadians to make progress on this mission. Today, in particular, we recognize the incredible work of many people and organizations who have contributed to this apology process. We recognize and thank the No.2 Construction Battalion National Apology Steering Committee, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, and the National Apology Advisory Committee, which is comprised of descendants and national subject matter experts on the No.2 Battalion and, of course, 5th Canadian Division and the Canadian Army. I also thank everyone who has participated in our consultations and outreach efforts. To date, close to 400 descendants have been engaged and consulted. Many dedicated individuals have ensured that no detail is overlooked as we seek to identify and hear from as many descendants as possible to inform the apology and future commemoration initiatives. This is so important. Indeed, your work will ensure that members and descendants of the Black Battalion will at long last receive the respect, the recognition, and the gratitude that they so richly deserve. Je tiens à saluer vos efforts exceptionnels.
I would like to thank you for the exceptional efforts that you made. I want to applaud these efforts. So those brave men finally see their ancestors acknowledged and honored as they assume their rightful place in Canada's celebrated military history. As you know, my predecessor, Minister Anita, on behalf of the federal government, confirmed our intent to apologize to a No.2 Construction Battalion descendants and the community in 2021. Black Canadians faced barriers, resistance, and racism when they tried to enlist in the armed forces. And when these valiant volunteers were finally granted entry in significant numbers, they were marginalized and segregated through the formation of a Blacks-only non-combat battalion.
An injustice that cannot and should not be ignored. I, as Minister, and our government are wholly committed to delivering a meaningful apology to address the discrimination that these men faced before, during, and long after their service. Comme C'est la première fois que j'ai l'occasion.
Since this is my first opportunity as the Minister of National Defense to speak publicly about this intent, I feel it's important to reaffirm that commitment, both in my role as minister and on behalf of our government.
The opportunity to speak publicly on the No.2 Construction Battalion. I believe it is so important for me to reaffirm this commitment to deliver an apology as the Minister of National Defense and on behalf of our government. An apology that has long been requested by descendants and the community. I am deeply committed to this cause. Throughout my whole life, I have stood and fought for equal and fair treatment for people from all races, religions, and genders, among other minority characteristics. And this apology is top of mind for me now, while I am seized with advancing the necessary cultural change within the defense team and to create a more inclusive organization that reflects the diversity of Canadians we serve. When I met with the Black Cultural Centre of Nova Scotia at the beginning of March, I shared this sentiment and I recommitted to continue working with the organization to make sure that we get this right. The more I learn about the battalion, the more I feel connected to these members, their stories, and their experiences. I know many of them came from right here in Nova Scotia, and yet, despite growing up in Nova Scotia myself, I did not learn of their stories until much later in my life. An entire community and generation were denied their heroes after the Great War, and we must therefore raise awareness and ensure that Canadians learn this history. This ongoing engagement with all of you will be of enormous value as we keep striving to grow and evolve. If you've not yet had the chance to participate in consultations, please visit the website for the upcoming announcements on when those additional sessions will take place. Grâce à toutes ces activités et tous ces outils,
Thanks to all these activities and tools, we were able to join with almost 400 descendants, and this number is increasing every day. So when we will present the excuse this summer, we'll be able to integrate even more of their stories, of their observations.
Pleased to share that the apology is scheduled for July 9th at 1 p.m. in Truro, Nova Scotia, and that I very much look forward to being back home in Nova Scotia and being there in person with all of you on that very important day. This apology will be for those who are no longer here to hear it, for their descendants, and for those of you who have worked tirelessly to keep their legacies alive. But the apology will not be the end. It will signal a new beginning, a solemn promise of progress as a way to honor these courageous men and preserve their legacy within Canada's distinguished military history. We must learn from their resilience and their resolve. And we must push forward through adversity to forge a path for those who come after us. Thank you so much. Merci. Miigwech.
Inspiring words, sister. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I have the honor of introducing to you Douglas Ruck of our National Apology Advisory Committee. Douglas.
Thank you. Good morning. Your Honors, Minister Anand, distinguished guests, in present here and virtually, and Australians across this country who are watching this historic event. It's an honor to be here today, representing the National Steering Committee, and representing as well my family and the late Senator Calvin Ruck, the author of the book, No.2 Construction Battalion. Thank you, Minister, for reaffirming the government's commitment to provide an apology to the men of the battalion and their descendants. As many of you know, March 28, 1917 was the very day in history when the men of the battalion formed at the Halifax waterfront, preparing to leave for England, waiting to hit across the seas on the SS Southland. In many respects, those of us who now participate in this national consultation and in this forming of the apology and onwards are also preparing for a journey. It's a journey that will also take us to some degree into the unknown. The men of the battalion, every step they took towards trying to represent this country was met with racism, oppression, and disregard. They were told, this is not your war, this is a white man's war. They were effectively being told, this is not your country. You have no interest, no outcome in this war. But they persisted, and they continued to strive to be part of what was so important to them, to our community, and to Canadians in general, despite being dissuaded and told to go back home. As we come together in consultation, we are also facing a situation in which we are not sure of the outcome. The apology is important. Let us in no way diminish that. The words that are spoken, the way they are delivered, the person who delivers them, all this is significant. But equally so, and even perhaps greater importance, is what comes after that. That's the unknown. The consultation made it very clear that if in fact the apology is not followed by substantive measures, then those words, despite the best of intentions, will have little meaning and minimal impact. Not only is it time for the men of the battalion and their descendants to receive an apology, it's time that changes take place. We heard the minister's commitment to reforming, restructuring, improving the Army, our Canadian forces. The time is here to make sure that happens. There's a part of me that will say to you right now, I'm disappointed that we're talking about this in the year 2022. But there's a part of me that also says to you, thank God that we are. My father, as mentioned, strove his entire life to make a difference. He gave these speeches. He uttered these words. His hope was that I, his son, would not have to do the very same thing. And my hope is that my children, my daughters, my grandchildren will not stand before you someday saying the very same thing. The minister's words are important. They must make a difference. But if things remain the same, then all of this is for naught. If things don't change, and if we in this country, be it racialized or marginalized communities, do not feel this is our country, then the efforts of the battalion and their sacrifices have not been taken into proper account. So we have an opportunity to make a difference. The government of Canada has an opportunity to make a difference. Promises have been made in the past. Apologies have been given in the past. All meant to be meaningful, all meant to be important. But sadly, sometimes the apologies are forgotten. We must not allow that to happen to the men of the battalion. The men of the battalion enlisted in obscurity. They trained in obscurity. They served in obscurity. And they came home to a country that was quite willing to allow their service and their sacrifice to fall into obscurity. The commitment of this government must be that the men of the battalion will not be allowed to fall into obscurity by default. This is a most significant moment in the history of this country. And the journey that we are now on must lead to a point that the men of the battalion are recognized, that the men of the battalion and their sacrifice is seen as being an example and a guidepost for the future, and making a difference as to how we live and how we appreciate and how we recognize others. The purpose of this journey is to ensure that that takes place. That is the cause of our journey, and that is what we must achieve. The consultation committees and those we've heard from across this country have made it very clear that as important as this apology might be, and as important as it is, what follows is as important, but even more so. When we leave Truro on July the 9th, following that event, and that event will be celebratory, and will also be a time of solemn remembrance for those who gave so much and asked so little. But when we close that event, those descendants must go back to their homes, knowing, and they have the right to know, that there will be changes, that things will in fact be made different. That is why we're here. That's the purpose of our journey, and that must be the end result of our journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that passionate call to action, Douglas. I assure you that everyone in this room and in the rooms across the country who are listening to this are going to follow that message and that call to action. And now we have the pleasure of hearing from Sheila White. She's the granddaughter of Reverend Captain William Andrew White, chaplain to the No.2 Construction Battalion. Sheila?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Minister, mayors, dignitary, colleagues, and friends. I was invited to speak as a member of the National Apology Advisory Committee about why the government's upcoming apology is important. A brief anecdote. I told a journalist acquaintance, an employee of our national broadcaster, about the project we were working on, and the response said somewhat sheepishly, "I didn't know Canada had blacks serving in the First World War," unquote. If members of our media don't know about this part of our history, you can bet most Canadians don't either. So here's one reason this apology is important. The national apology will lift the cloak of invisibility and will bring to light this incredible piece of history. Here's another reason. At our public consultations as a facilitator, I asked participants in my breakout groups, were the stories of men's involvement in No.2 talked about in their homes growing up? Predominantly, the answer was no. Some suggested it wasn't mentioned because of the element of shame that affected the Black men who served. Shame wrought from systemic disrespect. The government tried to keep them out. White soldiers didn't want to dine with them, sail with them, serve with them, or trust them to fight the enemy with them. As a granddaughter of the storied Reverend Captain W. Andrew White, I'd like to quote what he said to the United Baptist Convention in Wolfville, Nova Scotia on August the 28th, 1929. He said, "I have seen on the streets of London colored men from America, the West Indies, the Indians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and men from all quarters of the globe, dressed in the uniform of the Allies, doing their bit in the cause they called the cause of freedom and democracy. For a time, all barriers of race and color were broken down. They were comrades in arms. On the return to their homes, they expected to find the same conditions existing. Instead, they found other barriers they had never known before. I am reminded of the terms intergenerational trauma and institutional guilt, 21st century concepts being explored, understood, and embraced now. The trauma, shame, and guilt must be cleansed and healed. An apology is the right thing to do and must be expressed sincerely and forcefully. An apology gives voice to the story so the truth can sing and change can be realized and pride returned. And I'll end with a favorite quote of my mother's. As long as I keep my face toward the light, the shadows will fall behind me. The apology should light the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you for those inspiring words from your mother. We're also privileged to hear another perspective from a descendant of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. I'm honored now to introduce Sylvia Parris, whose father, Joseph Alexander, was a member of the No. 2 Construction Battalion. Sylvia?
Thank you, MP Fergus. I want to acknowledge that I joined this event from Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people, and to acknowledge as well the presence over 400 years of African Nova Scotians, and we as a people acknowledging the support of the Mi'kmaq and acknowledging, as we've said here previously, that we stand on the shoulders of those ancestors who came before us. And look back often for their wisdom. I'm appreciative of the federal government striving to respond to the Black communities across the country, request for it to acknowledge the No. 2 Construction Battalion and provide redress for how the men of the Black communities were treated by military institutions and its leadership. I would imagine that my father, Joseph Alexander Parris, a private in the battalion, would be enheartened to experience not just the recognition of the No. 2 Construction Battalion, but also the inclusion of the wider Black community in an apology that actions echo words of the apology in a way that shows movement. The journey of fully appreciating the contributions of my father, my uncle, and all the Black men who fought to fight came to light through Calvin Ruck's book, The Black Battalion, Canada's Best Kept Military Secret. My career as an educator and my most recent role as CEO of the Delmore Buddy Day Learning Institute, which publishes Afrocentric resources for school and community, and most deeply, the gap in the memory of a child who missed the chance to sit at my father's knee and hear of his experiences in the battalion and the World War, affirms the importance of education in the public schools throughout all grades. I will continue to advocate for this story and the stories of the contributions of Black people and what they have made, and it needs to be accessible to all. Throughout this process, co-led by the Black Cultural Centre of Nova Scotia, family members of the battalion have been able to gather to share their family stories and learn from each other. A place to express our feelings and grow the deep community relations beyond geographic borders have meant much to me. This amplifies those annual July gatherings held at the commemorative site in Pictou, Nova Scotia. As I acknowledge here today, Your Honors, community and government dignitaries, and individuals who are observing across the country, I want to say as well, I look forward to an apology that provides tangible ways for ensuring that the injustices of treatment of my father and uncle, and all the Black fathers and uncles of that time, are translated into policies and practices that validates the importance of ensuring that loss of opportunities and current barriers in all sectors are seen as priorities to be concentrated on by governments. Thank you, Minister Anand, for your leadership and collaboration. And thank you to all the event planners, the leaders of the league. Thank you to those who stand, who have made say deeply for the positive and right thing to happen. Thank you.
Compelling and enlightening. And we need to hear and preserve more of these stories. I'm pleased now to introduce the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Veteran Affairs Canada, Darrell Samson, Member of Parliament for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake, to speak. Darrell, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Greg, excusez-moi. As Member of Parliament for Sackville, Preston, Chesapeake, and of course, Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Veteran Affairs and Associate Minister of D&D, it's with great honor to be here today to represent the communities, of course, of the Preston Township in Nova Scotia. I would like to take the opportunity, of course, to recognize the Black Cultural Centre, headed by Russell Grosse and his team, and of course, the governing board for their leadership in their community, in their province, and in the country. Let me remind everyone that the Black Cultural Centre in Nova Scotia is the largest Black Cultural Centre in Canada. And also remind you that the largest Black intergenerational community in Canada is in North Preston. Au nom du ministre des Anciens Combattants, l'honorable Lawrence Macaulay, et moi-même, nous voulons exprimer la reconnaissance au Centre culturel des Noirs en Nouvelle-Écosse pour les efforts visant à reconnaître, honorer et commémorer les Canadiens noirs en uniforme et à faire connaître la discrimination qu'ils ont subie lorsqu'ils ont essayé de servir leur pays. Cette histoire demeure une partie regrettable de l'histoire militaire au Canada. The men of the 2nd Battalion were not unlike any other Canadians who volunteered to serve in World War I, fiercely devoted to their country, willing to risk and even lose everything in the pursuit of a just peace. They felt compelled to be of service at a time when all hands were needed. And yet, when they tried to join the Canadian Expeditionary Force, they were initially turned down. Not because they weren't fit to serve, they were. Not because they couldn't fire a weapon, they could. Not because they had neither the strength nor the stamina to combat, they did. Only one thing set these men apart from the other Canadians who wanted to join the fight on the faraway battlefield. And that, my friends, was the color of their skin. My friends, they fought for the right to fight for Canada. Lorsque les hommes de la 2e Bataillon de Construction ont essayé de s'inscrire dans le corps
They
expéditionnaire,
tried to enlist in the expeditionary group, they were rejected, not because they were not apt to serve. They were not because they could not fire a gun. They could. Not because they didn't have the strength or the endurance to fight. They had it. There was only one thing separating them from other Canadians.
Solemnly join my colleague, Minister Anand, and the Department of National Defense to reinstate our commitment of apology to the descendant of the No.2 Construction Battalion. May we always remember their service, their sacrifice of the Black Canadians who fought so hard to serve in World War I, and who, of course, fought for the right to fight for Canada. Merci, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Darrell. Merci pour votre passion.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Thank you for your passion and for your support to the Black community everywhere in Canada.
The Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and Member of Parliament for Central Nova, to say a few words. Sean?
Thank you so much, Greg. Thank you, Minister Anand, for your extraordinary comments. Thank you, Greg, for hosting, Darrell, for being here with us, to my colleagues at different levels of government in the room, but most importantly to the organizers and members of the community who've worked so hard to partner with the federal government to ensure that we do this the right way as we move towards the apology on July 9th for Canada's history with respect to the No.2 Construction Battalion. You know, I grew up in Pictou County, 10 minutes away from the site of the No.2 Construction Battalion. But like others have said, I didn't understand the importance of this history until I was well into adulthood. This apology is going to help ensure that future generations don't need to live a lifetime before they understand the extraordinary history in our own community. You know, when I reflect upon the speeches that we've heard so far, I feel privileged to be included at this event. We at home have a proud military history. But when I hear about certain members of the forces over the course of that history being excluded from service, not because of their lack of talent or desire to serve, but because of the color of our skin, I know that we need to do better going forward. I've heard Douglas today say that members of the No.2 Construction Battalion were told that this was a white man's war. It was not. That they had no stake in the outcome of the conflict. Nothing could be further from the truth. I remember hearing stories when I started to learn about this in more recent years about the extraordinary service of the No.2 Construction Battalion, saying, "We will send for you when you're needed." They were needed at the time, and frankly, the voices of Black Canadians and African Nova Scotians are needed today. When we were in the greatest conflict, perhaps in the history of mankind at the time, Canada turned its back on people who were willing to put their hands up, saying, "We want to serve our country." You know, eventually, as others have pointed out, because they fought for their right to fight for their country, which is one of the most exemplary, extraordinary examples of service to Canada that I can envision, we didn't accept them. Eventually, they were able to serve, of course, as we've discussed today. But I've been reflecting on my own family history with the Canadian Forces. My grandfather was a veteran of the Second World War. When he came home, for the better part of 75 years, he didn't have to buy lunch for himself because people were so happy to thank him for his service. He passed away a few years ago at 99. People were still saying thank you through me to him when I would show up at the cenotaph on Remembrance Day. There were no ticker tape parades at the end of the First World War for the No.2 Construction Battalion. There were no free lunches. When they came back to Canada, by and large, they continued to face the same kind of discrimination they faced before they served. Reflect on the conversations I've had with my grandfather over the Second World War or the First World War. I think about Canada's military history standing up to ensure that people were free from discrimination, free from persecution, that Canada as a state was pursuing justice and equality. We can defend those values right here at home. And I'd like to think in some small way that the commitment to apologize for discriminating against members of the No. 2 Construction Battalion on the basis of the color of their skin is a start. We can start to defend those values that so many fought for, including the No. 2 Construction Battalion overseas, by implementing those values at home. I look forward so much to being part of the ceremony on July 9th. I know that the apology won't erase a shameful chapter in our history, but it will create space for us to chart a better course for the future. And my commitment to you today is to be part of that exercise in partnership with the community, not standing alone from government thinking we know best, but listening to the voices in the community, the powerful stories that descendants have shared today, and making sure that we do this the right way going forward. I think it's important we, more than 100 years later, take this opportunity to reflect and to commit to do better. Such an honor to be here with you. I look forward to continuing this conversation, not just until July 9th, but well into the future and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, brother, for those very important words. Well, this concludes the speaking portion of our program, or the speaker portion of our program, I should say. I'd like to thank you all so very much for joining us here. And I look forward to seeing you on July 9th when the apology comes. I'm also especially looking forward to the day that we will not have to gather to issue an apology to any other group that would have faced the same kind of discrimination that the No. 2 Construction Battalion had faced. Looking forward to the concrete steps that we'll be taking to ensuring that those better days. I now hand it over to Owen Lee to conclude today's event with a moving rendition of A Change Is Gonna Come. Owen.
I was born by the river in a little tent door, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change is gonna come. Oh, yes, we will, yeah. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. Oh, 'cause I don't know what's up there for me beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know that I know change is gonna come, yeah. Oh, yes, it will. So I go to the movies and I go downtown, yeah. Somebody please tell me, boy, don't you mess around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come, yeah. Oh, yes, it will. So I go to my brother. Oh yeah, I said, brother, can you help me please tonight? But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. There were times when I thought I wouldn't last for long. Now I know that I'm able, yes, I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming. But I know that I know a change is gonna come.